Welcome back to our gubernatorial debate. Another issue on the ballot is initiated Measure 25. The question for voters is, should South Dakota increase taxes on tobacco to raise money for technical schools? And if IM 25 passes, would you try to repeal it? We'll begin with Ms. Noem.
Well, if it passes, it's the will of the voters, and no, I wouldn't try to repeal it. I think it's important that we respect what they want to do. And we do have some of the highest tuition costs in the nation at our technical schools. So we do need to find ways to drive down those costs and really make sure that our students have the opportunity to go through our technical schools and get the skills that they need to fill the hundreds of empty jobs that we have across the state. That really is our challenge. One of my proposals that I put forward on economic development is training that workforce, allowing them to participate in apprenticeship programs, and that the technical schools could do the administrative side on, and then they could fill the hundreds of empty jobs that we have across the state. And if we put those experiences in middle schools and high schools as well, we have more kids that know that there's really opportunities out here. And we get kids out of $12 an hour jobs into $25, $30 an hour jobs, being nurses, welders, electricians. Those are a real need across our state to really get our economy growing.
Let me ask you, back in February, I think you took a pledge to not raise any taxes,
support
any tax increase, but this in regard as a tax increase.
Yeah. But the voters are voting on it. I'm not inclined to have tax increases. I said I won't raise taxes, but I wouldn't try to repeal it if that's what they vote to do. And I'd also make sure that those funds follow through and get to those technical schools to reduce tuitions as well. That the integrity of what the voters voted on actually goes into place and does help those students who want to get that skill and stay and work right here at home.
All right, got it. All right, Mr. Sutton, you.
You know, this is also an issue. I've been a staunch supporter of the will of the voters, and my commitment is that if this thing passes, I'm going to make sure that money is targeted to where it's supposed to go. There's a mistrust of government because of, if you go even back to video lottery, people wanted that to go to education, and they're concerned that it's not going there. So my focus will be to make sure the will of the voters is upheld. That's what I've always done as a legislator. That's what I'll continue to do. The one concern I do have with some of Congresswoman Noem's comments is that the person she chose to be her lieutenant governor candidate actually led the charge to repeal the anti-corruption measure that the voters passed just 2 months after the voters passed it. That's concerning to me, and it should be concerning to voters too.
We'll give Ms. Noem a chance to rebut.
You know, I chose Larry Roden to be my lieutenant governor candidate because his values lined up with the values of South Dakota. He's pro-life. He loves his family. He loves the Lord. He served in the legislature for 16 years. I know if something happened to me, he could step in and fill the job of governor. And he also has the experience to step in and preside over the Senate. We need consistency, we need integrity in the process, and I chose him because he's someone who has that type of experience and background that can hit the job running in that role and can provide an institutional memory to state government that would be very helpful going forward. He's never shied away from doing hard things. He's always been willing to do what's right for the state and to listen to people. He was my majority leader when I first got elected to the state house, and he brought me in immediately to help look at our property tax situation and what we could do to make sure it was much more fair. So I appreciated that about his leadership.
All right, we'll move on.
Another important question. Teachers here in South Dakota no longer earn the lowest salaries in the country, but a new report says without keeping an eye on that, the progress could reverse itself. 2 years ago, the legislature passed a half-penny sales tax to boost their salaries. Well, since then, teacher pay climbed from 51st to 48th in the nation. Does that go far enough, and what do you propose for teacher pay in South Dakota? Mr. Sutton, this goes to you first.
Yeah, I appreciate the question because teachers are so important to our state. You know, my grandma Betty taught kindergarten in Eagle Butte for almost 50 years, and it's so important to have the best and brightest teachers here in South Dakota, which is why I worked with Governor Dugard and the legislature to make sure that we got out of last in the nation. You know, we were last for over 30 years, and I think that was frustrating to a lot of people. And so we're already seeing results of being able to keep the teachers that we have and attract the best and brightest teachers to here in South Dakota. And that's what we need to be doing. That's what we need to be focusing on. We do have challenges with the current formula. I think we need to, and I've always been an advocate for fighting to make sure our rural schools are protected. And that's what I'm continuing to do as governor of South Dakota.
And do you believe that 48th is good enough for our state?
No, I don't. I think we need to get competitive in our region. And so we need to make sure that we hold the accountabilities in place that we put in place in the Blue Ribbon Task Force to make sure that the money that is there currently is being used to increase teacher pay. And that's going to be my focus.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Noem.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think anybody thinks that 48th is good enough, that we absolutely need to find ways for our schools to invest in teachers, invest in classrooms, and make sure that we're always keeping education about kids and what we can do to help them be more successful going forward in the future. I worked on legislation in Washington that cut strings to federal money so that money could flow down to states and local school districts and they could utilize it better how they needed to educate kids and better prepare them for the future. I'll do the same thing as governor. We have some big opportunities to centralize and standardize purchasing for school districts to save them money that they then can plug back into teachers and into the classrooms. We also can work on ways that we can facilitate health care coverage so that we save them school district dollars that then can be brought in going forward. But keeping our AAA rating at the state level is incredibly important because a lot of our school districts finance their capital projects using that low interest rate that the state keeps at a AAA rating. So it's incredibly important that we keep our economy stable, our state government stable. If an income tax got passed in the state of South Dakota, that would be devastating. It would hurt our schools' ability to be able to get low interest rates when they're building projects and be very hard. So I know with Billy's continued support of that, it would be very challenging for our school districts to cash flow.
All right, we're going to move on to the next question. 2 years ago, Governor Dennis Dugard vetoed a transgender bathroom bill. He said that the veto would preserve local control for the school districts who could better provide accommodations for individual students versus a state mandate. Separately, there were concerns that this type of law would harm South Dakota legally and economically. If it comes up again, what will you do? Ms. Noem.
Well, I don't believe in discrimination of any kind. I think, though, that boys should use boy bathrooms, girls should use girl bathrooms. And this is an issue that we could continue to work on. I think a lot of local school districts have asked that they handle this locally and make sure that they have the ability to keep their kids safe. And that's something that we should be continuing to work with them on. But my fundamental belief is that we should provide accommodations for everybody, but that ultimately I'd like to have boys in boys bathrooms and girls bathrooms. And that the best ideas that work for our school districts, work for our businesses, and for our states are those that we come together on and agree with.
I think what I want to know too, and from some of our viewers, would you sign the bill?
The bill that they had before. I've said previously that I would have signed that bill, but I also would have kept working on it. You know, that would have been a point that it would have been signed into law, but that we still had improvements to make sure that it didn't hurt our economy and it didn't keep us from getting other businesses and events here in our state.
I'm going to ask Mr. Sutton, same question.
Yeah, I was with Governor Dugard on this one. I voted in the legislature and, to oppose it. And this is an issue, I think, of local control. And this legislation is a solution in search of a problem that is going to hurt our state if it were to be signed into law economically. And it's just not the right policy for South Dakota. We're better than that. And I was with Governor Dugard.
All right, we're going to move on to the next question. As the Supreme Court swings to the right, a number of issues decided by Justice Anthony Kennedy could swing back to the states if the court reverses previous decisions. What's your stance on same-sex marriage? Mr. Sutton.
I think this is an issue that I feel like has been decided by the Supreme Court, and I think that, we should respect that. And I think that here in South Dakota, we're a welcoming and open state, and I think I like the way it is right now.
All right, thank you, Mr. Sutton. Ms. Noem.
I support the definition of traditional marriage being between a man and a woman. Again, I don't think that anybody should be discriminated against and that we should treat all people equally, but when it comes to the definition of marriage and how we look at it in South Dakota, I would agree that that would be, in my viewpoint, between a man and a woman.
Okay, well, similarly, we wanted to know how both of you feel about taking your stance on abortion. How do you feel about it, Ms. Noem?
Oh, I'm pro-life, always have been. My voting record reflects that. I'm very proud that my running mate is pro-life as well, and that I've been endorsed by Right to Life in this campaign. I think they've recognized a real difference between me and Billy, that although he says he's pro-life, he's also funded by Planned Parenthood, which is the abortion provider in the state of South Dakota, and they've held fundraisers for him at top executive levels. So this is one of those areas that there's a clear difference between what he says and what he does in order to fund his campaign.
Mr. Sutton?
Congresswoman Noem, that's just not true. I mean, you know that's not true. I'm disappointed that you're trying to divide on this issue. I am pro-life. My record reflects that in the legislature. I've gotten multiple A ratings with Right to Life as well. And so I'm disappointed in in seeing you try to divide us on
Well,
this issue.
the facts are is that I've been endorsed by Right to Life. Planned Parenthood executives have given you money to your campaign, and the first hire that you made running for governor was your lieutenant governor choice, who is openly pro-choice. So I think that's why the decision was made, obviously and clearly, that we need a champion for life in South Dakota. It is a South Dakota Supreme Court case that could go before the U.S. Supreme Court to challenge Roe versus Wade. And the governor will decide how that's funded, how aggressively we defend it. I've always taken a very clear stance on this issue, and that I believe that life should be defended, and we'll do that as governor as well.
Chance for you.
Again, I'm pro-life. I mean, my record reflects that, and that's the position that it's a values thing for me. I mean, I grew up, valuing life and at every level, and I'm going to continue to be pro-life as governor, and that's the values that I hold dear.
How do you respond to the accusation that your lieutenant governor is pro-choice?
There's a number of reasons that you pick Lieutenant Governor. The main reason that I made the pick of Michelle Valley is that she's a reformer. Because as we've traveled the state, the issue we've heard most about is transparency and openness in government and reforming government. Michelle Valley is a reformer in every organization she's been in, whether that's Raven Industries or Avera or at USD. And she's the right person to shake up state government and to make sure that we have a state government that's accountable, transparent, and trustworthy. And those are the issues we're hearing most from of South Dakotans.
Okay, thank you both.
All right, well, next we'll talk about issues in Pierre, including fighting corruption and promoting transparency.
The South Dakota gubernatorial debate continues in 1 minute.